Okay, Skipper and Clark here, small boat restoration, our little hobby adventure. We gave you a boatyard tour the other day, but some people commented we might have missed a few boats. So we'll pick it up part two. Not sure if we got a shot of the little nutshell pram. Excuse me. Seems to be happy hanging out in here in the Lewis Boat Works. And probably will stay in this general vicinity. Doesn't take up much room. Put it on a dolly. If we need this extra space, we can just run her out the bow hatch or the stern hatch. Get her out of the way for a few hours if we need to. But it's saving us from having to figure out a cover to keep her in the yard or somewhere else. These boats will store on their side, or you can store them on their stern too at 8 feet tall. If I wanted to, I could stand her up on her stern and lean her up against the wall. It's 90 pounds. Maybe throw a little line around it to it doesn't topple over on someone, but plenty sturdy to do that. Keeping an eye on any kind of the transom fittings. You put down a piece of foam or something. So you come around the corner to Pelican Icon 10-foot kayaks hanging out on the fence right now. They're going to migrate over to the Sunfish Shack area, and that way we'll have a nice clear path down the side here. This other shed called the hire garage. Got a few boats hiding in here. I think there might be 5 of them, so we'll just go from right to left over there on a little furniture dolly. 1952-ish Alcourt standard sailfish, and by standard I mean the smaller, the original 11-foot 7-inch. Her name is Winnie. And these little dollies, I'll show you in a minute, work pretty good to move boats around. We emptied this whole shed out a few days ago so we could get no kidding real electrical plugs to replace the temporary extension cords and plugs I had running to get our lights wired up. So nice LED lighting for the shop, some overhead plugs and sidewall plugs, and a motion detector light switch, which I've really enjoyed having, because usually carrying or pulling something in and out of the shed, and it'll come on when you walk in, and it'll usually stays on most of the time you're inside working on something. It has a timer, so when the timer goes off, you can just wave your hand or move around a little bit to get it to come back on, and then when you leave at the end of the day, lights can stay on for a bit and you can go on your merry way. Here's our 1959 Sorg 15-foot runabout Willow, built in Detroit, sitting on another fine Eddie English trailer with a drop frame, radial tires, a nice long bunk under the keel and under the stringers. Good support for a wooden boat like this. And we talked about this boat on another video, or you can look off to the right side on the blog, and all of our boats have their own dedicated pages to learn more about. She's shy, hiding under the cover right now because we had her outside for a few days. Didn't want her filling up with pine cones, pine needles, and all the leaves that are coming down. Next up in the shop, 2021 punt, 8-foot punt named Scuppers. Again, we're talking about these little, just buy these furniture dollies at Lowe's or Walmart or something. This boat's 60 pounds, but I can move it around with a couple fingers, get it outside. You do have to be careful if there's a breeze blowing. You probably want to throw a little line on it so it doesn't topple over. And same thing, the mid-1950s, probably 52, 1953-ish Alcourt super sailfish. And by super, it means they stretched it out to 13 feet 7 inches. And this one is actually probably classified as a sailfish 14 Deluxe, probably really before they came up with the moniker of a super. Actually has a little combing on it. Little dry deck combing, they called it, and had a fancier bow handle. A little more chrome, a little chrome keel strip up front. Are some of the extra features you could get. These also came with the rub rail and a tow rail, which on a sailfish we found out comes in pretty handy. Something to wedge your heel against, or a little something on the side of these boats to grab onto is better than just having a 90-degree edge. So if you got a little boat like this, you might consider putting a rub rail on it, possibly even a tow rail, and work on it from there. And then next to it, 1953 Alcourt Sunfish Zip. Zip was the, so from right to left, you had the standard, or they just called it the sailfish, because that's all the Alcourt made at the time was sailfish. It was the first boat they started making in 1947. The early 50s came out with the longer, wider sailfish. So they call them the Sailfish 12 and the Sailfish 14, or in this case, the Sailfish 14 Deluxe. In 1953, late 52, early 53. Eileen Bryant was Alex Bryant's spouse, an accomplished world champion sailor on her own. Story goes that Brian's wife was pregnant, and she wanted a boat with a wider deck and a cockpit to put her feet in, more comfortable. Well, she knew what she wanted in a boat, so she told the folks, and they drew it up on the floor and built it, and that's the Sunfish. Still building them today, over 500,000 of them out there floating around. They started off with the wooden version, and then 1960 introduced the fiberglass version. 1960 they also introduced the fiberglass version of the Sailfish, which by that point they were calling it the Super Sailfish Mark II, with Mark II being fiberglass. So we've got the first 3 generations of fish that came out of Alcourt. We're missing a Super Sailfish Mark II, the fiberglass one. We've owned one for a little while, and we're just happy with having the Sunfish at the time, and then these other wooden sailfish popped up. Couldn't pass on them, so kind of have a little Alcourt collection going. But this boat here, Zip, 1953. The story is that Eileen came up with the idea for the boat, and so they built 20 of them and gave them out to family and friends, I guess you could call them prototypes, to see if they liked them. And evidently they did, because they're still building them decades later, just in fiberglass. But this boat, Zip, is number 13 of the 20 that they built. We don't know where the other 19 are, but we've got number 13 right here. A few differences on the early boats. Had this long sweeping combing that went back past the cockpit. May or may not have been handy if you kind of wanted to nestle your backside against it. Might have been a little comfortable ride, but if you wanted to hike out, that thing's wouldn't be comfortable hiking over that. So they shortened the combing and just made it more of a V shape, and widened it out a little bit, so the later V-shaped combing came out to about here and stopped about there, and the sweeping combings went away. Also, the early boats, wooden, they just had open holes in the bulkhead back into the stern compartment and the forward compartment, and limber holes to drain. So in some ways, I think that's better. The water goes in, the water can come back out. You might have a swamped boat, it's not going to sink on you, but you get it back to shore and you can bail it out. And nowadays we got cordless shop vacs, you can suck out any water that gets in there. But eventually on the wooden boats, they just made that a solid piece of plywood. And I'm talking about this bulkheads on the fore and aft sections of the cockpit. Just became a solid piece. with a pontoon type closed compartment. And then starting with the wooden boats, they would add a drain somewhere on one side, and then maybe on the other side they'd add a drain for the other side. You know, why they put them on two sides, I kind of think that, you know, there's the structure inside the boat, these little frames that run side to side, and some longerons that run fore and aft for the keel and the deck. And there were limber holes. The frames, you know, were not flush up against the bottom of this deck. The frames were just attached on the side over here with the little block. So at the top part of that block and the bottom part of that block, there's a little notch cut out so water can run down to a low point. And the frame isn't touching, so if the boat's, you know, on its belly, that water can run to a low point. And but it would have a little bit of problem with this 3-inch wide longeron that's under the deck, of maybe going over that hump to get all the way to the other side. So that's my guess as to why they had a drain hole on this side and a drain hole on the other side. Of course, it was different compartments, but you could get the bulk of the water out that way. And this was high grade marine quality plywood, and it would dry out as long as it wasn't saturated or didn't have standing water in there. It would be, you could keep your boat pretty dry that way. Of course, if you start taking on water, you want to go find out where that leak is and fix it. And you can do an air leak test on these just like you do on your fiberglass boats. Just blow a little low pressure, high volume air into the hole and go around it with soapy water and look for where water's coming out and repair it. One of the common places we find will be where the deck seam or the hole seam is. You know, right in here you might see a bubble come out. Well, you just take some type of sharp tool and dredge a little bit of that out and inject some thickened epoxy in there and repair it and seal it back up and just keep on top of it. Let's see, what else do we have in here? Got some of the parts for a Scout, our 17-foot Grumman double ender. Got most of the sailing rig components in here. Rudder and lee boards. Man, you can make a canoe complicated real fast if you want to sail it, because then you need a mast step and you need a lee board bracket, and you might need an additional thwart to put some blocks on for the rudder. Then you got to attach a rudder to the tail end of it. Hang these lee boards on here, and they are not light. Got to put a bracket on your transom for the rudder to clip onto, another bracket, and the bilge of the boat for the mast to step into. And then, you know, because it goes from 72 pounds up to, who knows, 80. At that point, you're going to want this, you know, carry bracket, thwart bracket to put on there. It's supposed to be padded on those little pieces of wood, but, you know, if you're already carrying 80 pounds on your shoulders, what do you care about whether it's padded or not? And then you got lines for tillers. They used line steering, which ran about halfway up the canoe on either side back to the rudder, so you could sit amidships and kind of tug on that line to work the rudder. Rarely do I see two people in a sailing canoe. It's usually one crazy person in the middle, sitting in the bilge, grinning for the camera and having fun. They had a little lateen rig, and they also had a little gunter rig, and we've got both of those. One day when I'm in a crazy mode, we'll put all this extra stuff and turn a perfectly fine, fun canoe into a bunch of sticks and strings and sail it around for 10 minutes and say we did it. So back here, we keep the rudders close to each boat. So there's zips, rudders, and dagger boards. We've upgraded. We've gone from the little 31-inch dagger board up to a longer 39-inch Barrington, and went from the little, you can see back there, the second rudder back's kind of got an elephant ear shape. That's what the original rudder looked like, and you can see the other rudder next to it. Alcourt redesigned that in the late 50s to put more surface area on it and get better performance out of it. So we've We have the original rudders, but we also have upgraded rudders, and we sail with the upgraded dagger boards and upgraded rudders and keep the others handy for our boat shows. And then over on the other side is, now the little sailfish does pretty good with the little elephant ear rudder, but C2, the closest dagger board for the 1960s boats is called a spoon tip. And that's a better performing board. It's 39 inches versus the dagger board that's right behind it that's only 31 inches. So more keel is always a good thing on these boats, with the exception of when you jump from 39 up to 44, like the current dagger boards are. It's all great when it's below the boat, but when you start trying to pull that dagger board out when you're doing beach hops, it's just more board to deal with. And get it up high enough, the lower boom can be swinging back and forth. That boom can catch on the dagger board and capsize the boat on the beach. And that's always, you know, it's never happened to us, I'm sure. Actually, it hasn't, but it does, you know, start to, if you got a little wind blowing, so you either need to get the sail down or get the dagger board out. So there's always some compromises. And so that's part 2 of the boatyard tour. And I said this is a hire garage, named for a skipper's family. Hire garage east, I guess it is now. There's another hire garage up north. And then the other shed over here is Lewis Boat Works. And we've been real happy. This is mostly a workshop, and the one next door is mostly wooden boat storage. I like to keep, especially these vintage boats, inside, away from the squirrels and critters, raccoons and otters, so they're not deciding to turn them into condos. So I hope y'all are doing good and enjoyed part 2 of the tour. And if everyone behaves, maybe you'll get part 3 of 3 and see the skipper's Flagship on the next video. That about does it.